Hey, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you happenstance on this truth bomb riff, truth bomb riffing the con on Thursday, August 22nd, 2024 at 12:16 p.m. My name is Patrick Lovell. I've been using a new hashtag recently called hashtag Patrick Lovell, the producer. And I am the producer of a long form documentary series that is the information of the blueprint that reveals all. And you can find that for free at www.thecon.tv. But the reason I'm recording this now is in context to really all of the madness that's going on, but both really a lot of interesting things going on as well, particularly as it relates to the closing act, as it were, of the 2024 Democratic National Convention, and of course, Chicago's United Center. And it has really been an amazing constellation array, galaxy of superstars from the Democratic Party, just revealing and projecting the monumental difference between the offering of the Democratic Party and the presidential candidacy of both Kamala Harris and, of course, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz versus all things this just insanely rotten, gross, upside down, inside out, lying, denying, conniving, putrid Republican Party and their media apparatuses of propaganda, hate, defamation, intimidation, and all of the other pollution that goes with mass stupidity that's on display every single day, particularly through the social media platform that I use the most, but really everywhere else, but X. And, I was reminded this morning that, this incredible sort of lineup, everything from, I think back to like night one, which I was really impressed with of the convention in Chicago. But I'm just thinking, I'm sorry, her name's not coming to me. She's a representative from Texas who is magnificent. Actually, I'll tell you, the guy from Connecticut who talked about and called out the Supreme Court. Jimmy Raskin is the other that was just really impressive. And it just went on from there. But by the time we got to literally Hillary Rodham Clinton, who just nailed it, and I thought President Joe Biden was magnificent in what he had to say. And then ultimately, God, Hillary was really something. In fact, for those of you who know me and know what it is that I talk about frequently, I had commented and I had complimented Hillary on her performance because, given what she knows and what she's been involved with, and really the undercurrents of everything that I reveal, she didn't lie. She did not lie in her speech to the convention, which was a remarkable sort of Svengali balancing act of a master class of how it's done. And then, all the way through, of course, Michelle Obama was extraordinary. Oh my God, was she inspiring? And she was just beautiful. And the content of her character on display in the sermon that just kind of rose to the mountaintops. That was like the perfect correlation, quite frankly, to Dr. MLK. I mean, it was just extraordinary. And then, of course, that's exactly what we'd expect from former President Barack Obama, who didn't fail to deliver. He was remarkable and maybe just a shade less impactful than Michelle, which was shocking to me. But the two of them were an incredible powerhouse. And then, of course, last night we had former President Bill Clinton, who was just incredibly remarkable and charismatic in his own way. And again, genius. I got to be honest with you. When I watched his speech, I was thinking to myself, considering his satire and some of the things he said about Donald Trump, which they all have said things about Donald Trump. And of course, who can forget President Obama talking about crowd size, which was amazing. But when Clinton yesterday was just talking about just the ridiculousness of Donald Trump in the Republican Party, I thought to himself, and I would love to have been a fly on the wall. knowing that Trump is flying around literally this week on Jeffrey Epstein's jet. Trump never lacks for subtlety. And, I saw one post on Twitter today where someone was like, how do you explain this Republican Party and what everything they represent is to my daughter? And I'm like, show her Mad Magazine or National Lampoon, and teach her satire because that's what it's all about. You can't make this stuff up. You can't make any of it up as it relates to, and I'll go on shortly to describe Elon Musk and his unbelievable web, but as it relates to everything that's been going on. But the centrifugal force of the Democratic Party is basically the equivalency of like an SEC champion. And actually, before I move on from Bill Clinton, I should mention that, last night's speech by Tim Walz was really inspiring and nice and lovely in his pictures of his family. And I know that I've seen pictures of his son crying, and then, people kind of comparing it to Kyle Rittenhouse on both sides. Just stupid, silly stuff. I mean, that story of how they ended up, going through the complications of pregnancy and what that means in context, all of the drug that's involved with Roe and yada, yada, yada in the States, and how they finally, were blessed with their daughter Hope and their son. And, his story of being a high school football coach and a state champion and a veteran of 24 years in the National Guard, and how he did that right out of high school. And, and I saw this other really kind of maddening story by these lying Republicans that you don't know what's true, but they laid out something embarrassing and humiliating and really dark about Tim Walz that was just, again, like the worst version of the writers on a cocaine binge at National Lampoon ever thought of back in 1975-ish, right? For anybody who understands those geniuses, or Hunter S. Thompson and Gonzo and all the rest of it. But Tim Walz, and I had remarked, and I had gotten some attention on this last night, is, just a gentleman, a decent human being, a good guy. And I think that's extremely important to identify and recognize as I'm moving through this process, of which I'm trying to connect with the millions of you that need to understand who I am and why I'm trying to get your attention and what it all means. But the intellectual superiority and the humanity of the Democrats on display this week in comparison to all things MAGA is, like, literally on an intellectual basis, particularly the champion, an SEC champion or a Big Ten champion. All the best teams are in those two conferences this year, as you well know, and playing like a pathetic, like subpar high school football team, which is representative of the Republican Party. The intellectual capacity and firepower of these geniuses, but particularly calculating political geniuses that have incredible charisma on the Democratic side, is just unbelievable to see in real time. And it's incredible, which makes this whole thing a no-brainer, right? So Kamala is going to give her closing remarks tonight. And I got to tell you, another person that I was super impressed by was Kamala's husband, Mr. Emhoff, if I've pronounced that correctly. I don't have notes in front of me, so I apologize if I mispronounced that. But boy, was he cool. Boy, was he a likable guy. And I thought to myself, could you imagine seeing like a conversation of the VP's married partner between, for example, Donald Trump's Melania and Kamala Harris's Doug Emhoff, right? He's an attorney and he's a smart guy and he's a great guy. And he's just a guy that I like. All of these people on the Democratic side are likable, good people that obviously are part of the meritocracy and work their way to the top to be the leaders they are. And it's extraordinary. And it's a no-brainer. And it's a no-brainer because, one, Robert Kennedy Jr. has never been legitimate. And everything that we're seeing play out right now is, of course, everything I've been telling you guys about. I think this is my 508th truth bomb. And I think going back to whenever Kennedy had made, his announcement for the race. I was really very interested and hopeful that Kennedy would be the right guy, but then I learned a lot of stuff that I'm going to, mention right here. But I just want to finish up with the Democratic side of the House right now. So, yeah, Miss Harris is a slam dunk. The Harris Walsh uh, ticket is a slam dunk. I mean, there's no way in hell, under any circumstances, is it okay or possible, and we can't even conceive of it, that Donald Trump is going to win this election. There's no chance. That can't happen. Yes, there will be the underhanded criminality of whatever their components are between their deep state, that comes through the likes of uh, you know uh, Peter Thiel and his group associated with the thugs that are representative of course, uh, Eric Prince and some of the others. I mean, dangerous characters, and the whole Bannon Hive network, and the Mercers and the Bannons. Bannon's like he's got any money. Bannon was the guy who I think put this whole thing together. To be honest with you, I think Bannon knew about America First back in the 20s that Rachel Maddow had done recently a fantastic job of exposing, which is MAGA, based on the America First movement that she did a podcast called Ultra, which reveals information that I didn't know, even though I was kind of on a periphery basis aware of. But what she did in terms of the details was extraordinary, and it blows my freaking mind that I didn't know about this stuff. But suffice to say, Bannon discovered that there was a sort of hub and spoke paradigm that utilized what I've mentioned, I think is the close approximation of how you can kind of like frame this stuff. LBJ from Texas, who was the vice president to John F. Kennedy, who became president after John F. Kennedy's assassination, had famously quipped that if you can convince the lowest rung white man, and of course LBJ is from Texas, and a smart guy, did a lot of great things to try to wage war against poverty, in addition to the guns and butter circus of the Vietnam era, to provide the real power to the guys that have been there the whole time. But ultimately, his statement was, if you can convince the lowest rung white man that he's higher on the ladder than the highest rung black man, you can pick his pockets all day. And therein lies one of the diabolical methodologies of control. The other control is the dark economy, the dark web, the dark shadow economy, which has always been there. And the easiest way to approximate this sort of variable in framing is that mankind has needs. People have needs. A lot of the times, particularly when people are desperate or held down and they get themselves in an economic pickle, they could find themselves involved with criminality or some sort of scheming, right? And a lot of that might involve gambling. And so gambling is one of the major arteries of the shadow economy, as is prostitution, which of course a lot of this stuff leads to drug use, or back in the old days, it would have been prohibition. Why? Because people want to get out of the pressures of the real world and the challenges of everything else, and to get high, drunk, or whatever, and do those things that people tend to want to do. It can be manipulated for a huge sort of volume of economy, and then be leveraged to control the dark side of our nature, right? Like Abraham Lincoln said, that the war of the Civil War, it was the battle of the better angels of our nature, right? Because in the end, like I've always pointed out, we've got two poles of our soul. You've got character, decency, integrity, and humanity, empathy, against complicity, duplicity, hypocrisy, deception. And everybody has to skew one way or the other depending on the circumstances every step of our lives. Whether we're in school and we didn't do our homework assignment, and we make up some sort of bullshit excuse like my dog ate my homework, all the way through the sorts of things that I reveal to you in my work, which is the largest revelation of the largest financial criminal conspiracy and cover up in the history of the world, that runs and controls everything. And so, yes, Kamala must win. There's no question about it. I'm all in on Kamala. And I like Kamala. I think she does bring joy. I think she does bring a demeanor of grace, and she's very confident, and she's obviously very professional and capable, and all of those things, which I'd be incredibly proud to see the first female president of her caliber, particularly that she's multicultural, multi-ethnic, Southeast Asian and Jamaican. Hey, freaking American, as far as I'm concerned. And that's just incredibly cool. And then, of course, Tim Walz, in my sort of estimation of how I play all of these things out, is literally bulletproof. He's not a part of what it is I'm about to unveil. But people, stop lying and stop buying lies. Here's the truth of everything. And this isn't going to prevent me from voting for Kamala, given the circumstances. First, be aware that I was all in on Obama back in 2008. I thought he was the white horse. I thought he was the guy that was going to ride in like FDR. He had a people's mandate to basically clean up all the insanity that had been shaping up prior to that over the course of the last 8 years, from 9/11 through the both Bush, administrations, his 8 years of, his presidential administration. That was the war on terror, but it was also what created what I call financial terrorism. We've been in this situation since the 80s, where we've created what's known as the three Ds: deregulation, desupervision, and decriminalization in the financial sector. There's a lot of scheming and three-dimensional chess in games that can be played through asymmetric information, which is one-sided information, that can create all sorts of methodologies of smoke and mirrors that, if you're not aware of and you don't know how the game is played, then you can be completely taken advantage of it. And I use this metaphor all the time. Imagine a freshman girl, very attractive girl. Maybe she was a cheerleader in high school and she wants to be a part of the cool club, and then she wants to go to a great fraternity. And then lo and behold, somebody gives her a roofie, and then she gets gang raped. Yeah, that kind of stuff happens all the time. It happens to girls that aren't, elite cheerleader girls. It happens to girls that whatever. But there could be a culture of this kind of thing. And it's been going on for a long time. And it went on long before roofies, drugs to be able to take advantage of people. But that in lies this sort of diabolical formulation of the power in the shadows. And maybe you've seen the movie back in the day. I can't remember what it was, but Jamie Lee Curtis was like, she was wearing sexy, attractive outfit at a pool table, and she ends up going through a process where she gets roofied and raped, and it was the whole case of that. I can't remember exactly what the name of the film was, but set that aside for a moment, by way of what our financial system has become. And for people who are young that are like, I don't know, somewhere, voting age, 18 to, let's say, 25, you don't know all the details of the world that I'm revealing to you, just like I didn't know all the details of the world of what happened during the 20s with the America First movement, who, as it turns out, were working hand in hand with actual Nazis that were receiving what we call, uh, and we did the same thing with the terrorist on 9/11, where the Saudis were providing material support, where the Nazis were providing material support to organizations and groups to get their guys elected using white supremacy through the churches to basically do the bidding of the Nazis in Congress. Yeah, that happened. And it was a big deal. And the only reason why they didn't win was because there was a power that was much smarter and more deft and more capable than they were, that was basically structured under the FDR administration, that did a lot of really incredible things for this nation, while having some vulnerabilities and things that they did by not allowing escaping Jews into the country, for example. But there's only so much you can do, I suppose, right? Depends on who you are and where you're coming from. That creates what your perspective is. So I'm not saying that FDR was perfect, but FDR did a lot of amazing things, particularly as it relates to dealing with these problems that I'm revealing to you. Because the stuff that we've been being grifted by in this roofie-like economic structure through asymmetric information going back to the 80s, particularly as it relates to what we call control fraud, starting in the savings and loan crisis that gave us the junk bond frauds of Michael Milken that were directly involved with none other than Donald Trump. Yeah, he was involved with that, both in his real estate in Manhattan as well as his casino, which I've seen a lot of videos on how stupid he was to lose money at a casino, but Taj Mahal. But he was using, tricks of scheming, of lying and grifting through the mechanics of junk bonds to do what was a version one of this asymmetric roofing of investors. Now, he also had betrayed, the workers that had worked on all of his stuff, and he had inherited all of his money. So this grotesque figure who's straight out of Gotham by the character that I refer to as Joker, has been playing with house money, and he's gone bankrupt 6 times by using all sorts of methodologies of control fraud through documentation of business fabrication and lying about everything under the sun because of the three-dimensional chess that happens in the griftopia of this financial engineering and scheming through what we call control fraud that he's been a part of the whole time, breaking the law for 4 decades. And the question that I've asked you in the past, for those of you who have seen these truth bombs, why wasn't he arrested decades ago? Because the prosecutors didn't do their job, which leads me back to, unfortunately, Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris came through San Francisco, yes, under Willie, why can't I think of his, Willie Brown? And he's going to sue Trump because of the helicopter story. Yeah, she was involved with some stuff. And then she ended up, kind of working through the ranks. And then she ended up as the AG of California, a very important position before she became senator. And then she became the vice president of the United States. But while she was the attorney general of the United States and all of these platitudes at the Democratic National Convention and the ads that we have seen include her as a champion of the little guy in every which way, shape, or form, where she took on the big banks and, of course, drug racketeers and, transnational companies and, all manner of flavor of bad guys as the AG, bringing them to justice, either getting them in jail, which you can do because there are criminal statutes for the AG of California. It's not just civil. But she may have gone after a lot of bad guys and may have gotten a lot of bad guys arrested. But she didn't take on the banks, not remotely. That much is a lie. What she did is she played the game that Eric Holder and Obama told her to play because they were working out the biggest, what my story is, the largest racketeering financial criminal enterprise in the history of the world that never ended, that has all of these elements that manifested from the 80s junk bond savings and loan era that morphed into what we call the I guess first it would have been long-term capital management, which was a derivatives run that basically destroyed the Soviet Union, if you want to know the truth. And then ultimately we had all of the meltdowns all over Asia in the late 90s that were playing the exact same financialization house of cards that at that time, Time magazine put on the cover that the men to save the world, the committee to save the world, were made up of 3 men by the name of Robert Rubin, who was Treasury Secretary for Clinton, and he came out of Goldman Sachs, and then Robert Rubin, who was the chairman of the board of the Federal Reserve, who came out of none other than Continental Savings, which was deeply embedded in the savings and loan crisis, and he worked for then Charles Keating, who went to prison because my mentor put him in prison. But that's why they put him at the helm of the Federal Reserve, because he was aware of all this. People like to call it chicanery. It's not chicanery, it's crime. It's multi-dimensional crime. And we have many, 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 many laws to deal with it if only prosecutors do their job, which means that you have to have regulation, which goes back to my 3D scenario. We got rid of the 3Ds, which are deregulation, desupervision, decriminalization, which means, yeah, we created racketeering for the smartest guys, the most clever, the most connected to big money guys in the country. And what runs the show in the United States and around the world? Who is our God? I'll give you a hint. there are presidents' faces all over the dollar bills or the whatever currency valuation is. Yes, it's money. Money is our god. Okay. But then again, where does money come from? And what's money valued on? And what is fiat currency? And what is globalization and the world's reserve currency? And what is macroeconomics and microeconomics? And what is the law? And what is geopolitics? These are all things that unfortunately you kind of have to understand completely to understand exactly what I'm telling you. However, I'm just breaking it back down to its lowest common denominator. It's not rocket science, it's racketeering. And we've all seen criminal crime series forever. If you see CSI, they go out and get the forensic evidence that proves who did what, when, and how, and what the murder weapon was, and if there's any superfluous information like emails or relationships that go into the case. That in a nation where nobody is above the law, that discovery through prosecution leads to indictments that lead to through grand jury trials convictions. That's our system. And that's our system that, of course, evolved from our founders fighting a revolution against the tyranny of King George III and, of course, the control of Parliament and the Navy and the Redcoats at that time, which was empire, because they were, of course, imperialists and they were extracting from the United States that decided, no, we're not going to play your game anymore. And were the first ones ever to defeat the English Empire. And they did so to create separation of powers for a government of, by, and for the people, where nobody is above the law, including companies. That's the idea, at least. And they fought a revolution and they basically played roulette with death to prevail. And yeah, they had their flaws. I know that. That's basic. Okay, whatever. Humans are always going to be flawed, and I'm not saying it doesn't matter. You have to reconcile things, but you also have to understand that they gave us separation of powers, and then we had the Civil War, which terminated bondage, only to be replaced by Jim Crow and all of these things. The fight's been going back and forth the whole time, and that's what good versus evil is. That's what character, integrity, and dignity and decency and empathy and humanity versus hypocrisy, duplicity, complicity, deception. I mean, that's the force. That's the light and the dark side of the force. And then coming back to Kamala Harris, yeah, she comes through the process, and we're being sold a bag of goods that she stood up for the little guy to get the big, as did Obama, to get the big, victories against the banks to help the regular guy. They did some. They did some. It was a very small percentage. I'd say there's probably 1 out of 10,000. But the rest of the money went to backfill coffers of lost revenue to the states and the federal government, quite frankly, through the financial nuclear terrorism that came from this massive, massive, massive global con. And so Eric Holder, who came out of Covington and Burling, which was a white shoe law firm, one of the best, biggest in the business, that's been a part of the system and the matrix between the government and finance from the very beginning. In fact, I think they have an office in Washington, D.C., equidistant between the Federal Reserve and the White House. That should tell you everything you need to know. But yeah, Eric Holder, who was our former Attorney General of the United States, came out of Covington and Burling, who handled all of the legal framework of what became known as MERS, the Mortgage Electronic Registration System, which was necessary to moving at the speed of light massive, massive, massive felonies, tens of millions of felonies, using illegal documentation fraud and business fabrication and lies on business records and appraisals and all of the other elements that we just saw Donald Trump get convicted of in the civil fraud trial of his business of he was supposedly lying to banks. Yeah, well, why did the banks loan to him? That's what none of the media understands or is paid not to tell you, because again, it's asymmetric information. You know what you know. It's called captured the flag. One side knows how to defend, information that you can't know. It's a game. You've seen it in every single movie that's come down the pike from Harry Potter. Think about the Ministry of Education or the arts and everything else, the bureaucracies, right? And then the battle between Dumbledore and he whose name can't mention. Whether it's Harry Potter or I could give you a million movies. where the same story and the plot line and the analysis takes place, which means that everybody in Hollywood already knows this trick and they've been telling us forever. I come out of the 90s where the two greatest films that really put all this stuff together for me was in The Usual Suspects, when Kevin Spacey's character said the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. And then I transitioned and channeled my inner Ezekiel Rollins, which of course is Denzel Washington in A Devil in a Blue Dress, when he said in his character, I got tired of them pissing on my head, telling me it was rain. Because he was dealing in that capacity as a protagonist, as a regular guy that just stumbled into a murder in corrupt Los Angeles of the probably 40s or 30s, maybe. Anyway, yeah, it's the same tune over and over and over. It's what the Mick Jagger wrote in Sympathy for the Devil. What's befuddling you is the nature of my game. Good versus evil, honesty versus lies. And Kamala Harris, as AG of the state of California, did not fight the banks. Neither did Eric Holder. They basically played this dog and pony show where they had to let the banks get away with it. Or otherwise, the entirety, or at least that's what they told us, and that's what they did, but to maintain power, because it was a political calculus, which is what happens the higher and higher you get into the power structure. To do what? To not use the law for the little guy, where the power is up by and for the people, in a government where integrity of law is above all else. It's not. And we know that. And so what's going on between this mayhem, between all things, what we could just, throw away as a MAGA, just garbage, machine of garbage. But the Democrats, yeah, Tim Walz wasn't a part of this. The question we have to ask Tim Walz is, hey, Tim, was this country designed, because he's taught history and sociology, definitely history, but he was like I said, he was a high school football coach, and he was a principal, and he was in the national security for 24 years, and I'll put that up against Trump's bone spurs and his ridiculous, disgusting behavior towards veterans, and yet people are waving the flag like he's some kind of hero, patriot. Bullshit. The guy's the biggest treasonous, lecherous worm that we've ever seen. And I got to thank him for this, the ultimate reflection of everything we are, that just cuts to the chase of the emperor's new clothes because of everything that I'm telling you. Because ultimately, his secretary of the treasury was a guy by the name of Steve Mnuchin, who came out of Goldman Sachs, who then had One West Bank in California that put together a consortium of billionaires that destroyed the people that Kamala is pretending that she saved, which she didn't. And the reason she didn't was because they saved the banks. They saved the billionaires. They saved the billionaires that put money into the coffers of the Democrats because of a thing called Citizens United. Both parties do it. Billionaires pay everyone. Both parties have to be able to get the money to be able to move forward. And there's all sorts of chicanery that's involved. Like if you're going to get on Senate committees like the Finance Senate Committee, you got to be able to bring in like millions and millions of dollars from these apparatuses, which is really what this whole lifeblood of the economy and everything that we do is all about, which is money. Where's it come from? How's it made? What's it based on? What are all the elements that I had laid out previous? In context to what I am telling you, the question that we have to ask Vice President, soon to be, Tim Walz, is, did the founders intend, through the revolution and the creation of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and separation of powers, and then subsequent American generations that had to live true to what we put up on paper by the sacrifice of the Civil War to break the bonds of slavery, only to give it up to Jim Crow, to ultimately have, later the civil rights movement, after all of the suffrage movements that created, in order to form a more perfect union that would lead to such incredibly important, scenarios in American history, starting with Teddy Roosevelt's trust busting, which dealt with the robber barons at that time. And then ultimately, all the way through, unfortunately, all the things that happened during the Roaring 20s that would lead to the same version of racketeering to hyperinflate stock assets through smoke and mirror tactics that they didn't have an out for that created the Great Depression. And then following the Great Depression, we had a gentleman by the name of Ferdinand Pecora, one of the heroes of the United States that not too many people know the name of, probably a very small percentage. I'd love to bring him up at the Democratic National Convention, I can assure you, as well as the lesson of, who he was in context to what we are. But he was put into commission an investigation to find out what created the Great Depression. And he found out. Meanwhile, all of the media at that time were covering it because there was Hoovervilles and 25% unemployment and millions of people starving, hanging on every word of what the rich guys in our society got away with to rug pull everybody else. And that led us to a law called Glass-Steagall, which separated investment banking from commercial banking, which is basically getting rid of casino banking based on playing with other people's money through speculation on things that could get upside and short-term returns to make the CEOs rich and their board of directors while they blow up everybody else. Glass-Steagall prevents that from happening. And that existed all the way through. And that came from Ferdinand Pecora's investigation, by the way. And it also created two other very important things: the 1934 Securities and Exchange Act and the Securities and Exchange, which the SEC, which are the cops on the beat to prevent the three-dimensional chess of very, very rich people from basically playing everybody for the fool through the three-card Monte. That gave us credibility. That gave us integrity, more importantly, because again, I use this frequently in my truth bomb riffs, sermons, and part, therapy for me to deal with the reality of this truth that I'm carrying on my back, which is like pushing a 2-ton boulder up to the top of Mount Everest, backwards, barefooted, which is a heavy lift, I can assure you. And ultimately, the nature of Glass-Steagall, gave us this impenetrable sort of, particularly after World War II, this financial paragon that rebuilt the world, but based on incredible dynamism and brilliance and common sense and innovations and all sorts of things that really stemmed from having a middle class that could create the interest in the stock market to grow it, but on a behalf of this, this burgeoning, consumer class, which is the middle class, that gave value to everything from houses to cars to everything else, because you could have the white picket fence and the 2 cars, and everything that came with it. But since the 70s, we've been having a very quick erosion of all that power through what we call globalization, because the middlemen decided that they wanted to basically, and they kind of had to, based on the way the scenarios were, if you want to make a lot of money, you got to be able to hyper exploit situations to be able to get the what they call, just like, at a craps table or a poker table, it's based on fees. It's the VIG. It's based on fees. It's moving the money to get a piece of it. Okay. And that's how financialization works. And so for the past 30 years, we've had, ultimately financial engineering based on globalization that moved all of the money to the oligarchs on this grand symphony that's played through geopolitics and interest through influence of intelligence, which is like the CIA and all of the other groups that are associated with that on a global scale, to be able to bring the products to market. And then, of course, Wall Street can offer through banks, credit cards and debt and all of those types of things that are built in for consumption. But the key consideration for consumption, people, are jobs. And people have to have jobs, and they have to know how their own economy works to live within their means, to be able to give value to everything that they purchase. But unfortunately, we're no longer in that scenario. Everything is a facade. Everything tries to move fast. Everybody tries to make money as quickly as they can through get rich quick schemes, which mostly filter into these cons that, could be housing, they could be cryptocurrency, they could be a whole garden variety of meme stocks and everything else on top of your salary or your 3 jobs to try to support your family to stay afloat. And going back to Kamala Harris, she let Steve Mnuchin, the ultimate bad guy banker, who basically is part of Trump's, Gotham Circus, who became Trump's Secretary of Treasury during his administration. She let him get away with basically using the same deceptive acts and practices, an illegal fabrication of documents to foreclose on millions of people. We don't know the exact number. We don't know the exact number of how many foreclosed homes happened. We think it's about 10 million, but I can tell you firsthand, based on all of the information that I've seen, because at the Registry of Deeds, nobody could keep up with the amount of volume that brokers and the entire industry were moving through the securitization pipeline to create these tranches of these mortgage-backed securities that then turned into derivatives based on collateralized debt obligations and credit default swaps that turned a $4.5 trillion housing Ponzi scheme market post 9/11 through Alan Greenspan, who had all of this information, which I have all the information of which Alan Greenspan knew. And that reason that's important because as the chair of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan was supposed to regulate the markets through the Homeowner Equity Protection Act. And of course, he didn't. And he had all the information of everything that I am telling you. And why is that important? Because Congress mandated to the Federal Reserve that he's the guy where the buck stops. But did he? No, he hyper-fueled it until it turned into a $4.5 trillion housing bubble, turned into an $800 trillion global calamity based on all of the same exact things the government now is demonstrating to us that Donald Trump is guilty of in the RICO scenario down in Fonnie Willis's situation, which is based on racketeering using documentation fraud to try to steal the Electoral College. That's one aspect of it. We just saw what happened in the 34 criminal convictions, the felonies that don the kind as we see the prosecutor Kamala Harris against the felon Donald Trump, that ultimately was based on deceptive acts and practices through falsification of business records and lying to the people, which is illegal. And that's why you should go to jail. Each felony conviction holds up to 4 years if Judge Mershon decides, to throw him in prison. He's not going to go to prison before the election. And if he becomes the president, then he can just go like this because he's the chief executive of the executive branch. Okay. Which means he was the officer of the United States, which the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, Section 3 says, as an officer, you can't be involved with an insurrection. And if you are, you can't run for office. But the Supreme Court said, hey, don't worry about the Civil War. Don't worry about the revolution. We're getting paid by billionaires, so fuck you. Yeah, that's what's happened. So the question you have to ask Tim Walz, for example, because he's an honest broker, he never played these games. He wasn't built in a, Yale, like he said last night, consortium to create this guy that's going to be amenable to working for hedge funds that control the country based on fraud or private equity or asset management or wealth management or whatever. The guys who are in control of the money that sink and play ball with the systemically important financial institutions, which I'm here to reveal to you, control everything because they told Eric Holder or Obama, and they told Eric Holder, hey, tell Kamala to play ball so that we can have Steve Mnuchin to be in his place, among other things. Which more importantly was, oh yeah, Eric Holder told you everything that exactly that I'm telling you, everything. But he didn't bring criminal prosecutions, just like the prosecutors never brought criminal prosecutions against Donald Trump for over 4 decades, which has given us this madness. And I say it all the time, corruption burrs and fuels fascism. And that's what we're in the midst of, which has now led us to Elon Musk and this consortium of billionaires like, the gay Peter Thiel, who was basically, he would have been happy to be in Rommel's freaking brown shirts because they were all gay and they were fascist. Yeah, he's a corporate fascist. And he hired J.D. Vance and his weird couch mannerisms or whatever that's all about. And ultimately, Kamala, again, played ball. Okay, she didn't come to the rescue, as did neither Obama, which I've got on camera. Obama said what Wall Street did was unethical, but it wasn't illegal, which was a fucking lie of a nuclear magnitude. But he gets away with it because he's charismatic. People want to believe him because here's this really, really cool guy that literally represents everything that we believe in. And yeah, again, going back to the very beginning of this truth bomb riff, the idea that the Democrats have this mammoth machine of intellectual capacity through all its Ivy League sort of, charismatic leadership over the joke that's the Republicans. That's a criminal apparatus that were cowards that would sell us out. They have sold us out to, think about it, to Russia, to Saudi Arabia, but who hasn't? over the course of the last 4 decades. Why? Because it's all about money, and the money goes through the flow of what it is that I'm revealing to you, of which the guys who really own the country are the banks, which is the financial system, which is a modern day equivalency of tyranny. And so I'm leading this charge to bring this all to bear, because ultimately, if we ask the principal, the coach, Tim Walsh, if we said, hey, was in your lessons and everything that you've learned and you taught your students throughout the last however many decades you've been a teacher, did it ever say that the founders of this country waged a revolutionary war and created the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and separation of powers that would ultimately lead all of these progressive wars that we've had to fight the whole time of our existence, and we're fighting it to this day? Was all of that manifested to be able to create billionaires that are above the law, that are getting trillions of dollars of free money, looting it from the full faith and credit of the United States illegally? And I'm not kidding you, it's illegal. That's what I bring to you that nobody else can, in addition to everything else. But more importantly, that above all else, they're doing it illegally to then elevate themselves above the law, which makes them impugn just like kings. And they need, a joker like Donald Trump in office to be able to guarantee that. He's the final death knell the coffin of our so-called democracy, which I've revealed to you guys for a long time is not a democracy. It's a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses the full faith and credit of the United States through what is effectively socialism for the mafiocracy that is now fueling fascism. So yeah, I feel really good about the Democratic convention. And again, I'm all in on Kamala compared to what we're dealing with. But the question that we have to ask Tim Walsh, because if you ask Kamala the question, and if you ask Obama the question, and if you ask Michelle Obama, even though Michelle Obama wasn't in on it, Hillary was, and that's the ultimate tell. Hillary didn't mention any of this stuff. She didn't go into, why did you take $400,000 in speaking engagements from Goldman Sachs because they offered? No, she didn't go there. That's not what was a part of her keynote at the convention. No, everything Hillary said was true. She didn't go into all of this other stuff that I'm talking about. But Tim Walz was never a part of this. He was never baked in like J.D. Vance, from Yale to a hedge fund to a libertarian billionaire fascist. No, Tim Walz is the real deal. He's the real deal. And so we've got to ask him, Tim, did this whole system create a scenario where billionaires would be elevated by free money fed to them by the full faith and credit of the United States illegally so that they could destroy everybody else? What do you think he would say? He'd laugh and be like, you're crazy. But I'm not crazy, Tim. And actually, you know that. You don't know what the details that I know because you're not Patrick Lovell, the producer. See, while you were doing all of those wonderful things, I've been delivering this at a level that no one in this country has. Not Rachel Maddow, not media, not NBC, not MSNBC, not CNN, of course not CNN. My God, those guys are the laziest people in the world. Think about it. Anderson Cooper and his whole jockeying of this Beltway insider and that Beltway insider, who are just basically talking points of propaganda. Nobody was an investigative journalist. Now, Rachel Maddow could have and had the power to, or the capacity to, and the resources, but she didn't. Why? Because she's effectively the communications director of the Democratic Party to make sure that you don't know this stuff, because they all get paid by it. Now, what I'm telling you, if we rise to the moment and do exactly what I'm calling for with the Clean New Deal, which is the answer to Project 2025, and it is the answer by way of what the United States has done in its past because of what we were able to accomplish with trust busting and the New Deal. This is the Clean New Deal. You just have to understand the facts. And that's very difficult when we're all faced with an ocean of madness and lies that are given to us both by mainstream media. And when I say mainstream media, I'll do include, the sort of echo chamber cable enterprises. But that 2 years ago, a district judge, I'm not sure if he was on the 3rd district, but had ruled because of all of the corporate attorneys at both MSNBC and Fox that Rachel Maddow and Tucker Carlson were entertainment, that you're not supposed to take them seriously. That was actually the legal remedy so that neither one of those networks could be sued by people that claim that the information that they were providing was untrue, that they're okay to lie. But interestingly enough, of course, we saw that Fox CEO Rupert Murdoch agreed to pay $787 million for promulgating the big lie on his network, which he revealed was built as a network of lies because that's how they make their money. And yet now we got millions of people that listen to all these idiots associated with Fox, but it's propaganda and it's lies and it's deception and it's gross and it's un-American. But at the same time, he paid $787 million. That's a fact because of the lies that they were promulgating because of the Dominion voting machines, which I just saw that Texas Governor Greg Abbott is not going to allow in Texas during the 2024 election because they work. Because he's going to try to steal the election for Texas. Because that's how these bastards operate. Because the law hasn't been able to hold them account. Because on the low end, Fonnie Willis made a mistake of having a personal relationship with a guy that was on our team that got the whole thing stalled, where maybe we would have been in court by now with a conviction of RICO, in addition to the 34 felony convictions. Maybe the legal guys up in New York, and by the way, they're all African American, which is quite extraordinary to me. But Alvin Bragg just crushed it on Donald Trump, of course, with the 34 felony convictions. Just think back and harken back to what, 2 months ago when we heard guilty, 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 guilty. It just, if I were the Democratic Party and I were creating their ads, I would play that over and over. That's just all I'd say. Guilty, 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 because he's guilty. He's a criminal. And then, of course, the civil fraud case and everything else. But ultimately, maggots don't care. They've been brainwashed. And what are we in the midst of at this last day of the Democratic National Convention, where Kamala is going to give her keynote and we're off to the races? And yeah, again, she won my vote just because she would have won my vote anyway. Like I said before, I would have voted for a dead Joe Biden over Trump twice on Sunday because those are our choices, guys. But I'm trying to galvanize millions of you to understand what the playing field is, to understand, for example, that Elon Musk is now what we all know. He's just a Svengali of propaganda. And I read the other day, and I knew this, but it was confirmed when I read this article that he was given $13 billion in loans by banks through private equity and based on the sovereign, current sovereign investments, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. And, they basically were like, here's money to buy Twitter for $43 billion. And he did put some of his own money in, but he didn't put the deference in, but whatever. And it's become, for the last 6 months, I've known this, but in the last 3 weeks, it's just on overdrive that his platform is hyperbolic propaganda and lies through fake accounts, which are the exact same thing that we saw in 2016 in Matt Taibbi's like, yeah, Russiagate, whatever. Bullshit. Prigozhin, the guy that was working for Putin with what was the IRA, which is a tech sector of KGB, created troll farms where they created madness and people going at each other's throats to sow the seeds of chaos before the 2016 election that got Donald Trump elected. Of which now we know that, of course, he was also getting paid $10 million directly backdoored by the prime minister of Egypt, which would have been, the largest presidential scandal in history if we didn't have a corrupt attorney general by the name of William Barr, who goes back to Contragate and all of the stuff that was going on then. You want to understand about what that's all about? Go check out the Octopus Murders by the Duplass brothers on Netflix, and they don't actually ever get to him, but they do talk about the Department of Justice. It's a mess of corruption. Corruption births and fuels fascism. Kamala Harris is going to be the president of the United States because she had already proved her worth to Wall Street back in 2008, 9, 10. And unfortunately, because of the choices, yeah, she's got to be our president. And I like her, and I like her husband, and I love her vice president. And yeah, I still, to a degree, like Obama. I certainly like Michelle Obama. I thought Hillary Clinton was magnificent, even though Bill Clinton, is a scheming, conniving, freak show of all sorts of problems. he certainly knew how to get what he wanted done. And yeah, he's probably singularly most responsible for the madness that we're in, because during Bill Clinton's administrations, we got rid of everything that created the 3Ds. He got rid of the regulation that we learned of because of Ferdinand Pecora after the 30s. So he wanted to create Financial Sophistication or Modernization Act. We had the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, which led to long-term capital management, which destroyed Putin, which wanted to get back at us through Prigozhin and now Trump. How's that? That's geopolitics. And oh yeah, Saudi's all over it. So anyway, the long and the short of it is, people, my God, you've got to understand that it was all manifested illegally by Federal Reserve Act 13.3. And I'm the only guy in the country that's telling you this. And yeah, I could go on to a dissertation for another 3 hours based on all of the elements that I have. But truth be told, what you need to do is wrap your head around the fact that The Con, my television series at www.thecon.tv, which we made for $4.5 million to get you the now $71 trillion truth, to repurpose the question. Hey, Vice President or Governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, was the founder's vision to give billionaires free money illegally behind the scenes so they could skull fuck the United States and be above the law and market forces? No, it wasn't, guys. But that's what we're in the midst of. What happened when Joe was saying, after he had that horrible performance in the debate with Trump, he said, I'm going to go. I had COVID. I was sick. Look, I'm fine. And then he gave that great speech in Detroit where it was like, Motown was Showtown. And then the next day, of course, Trump got shot, whatever that means, and nobody's talking about that. And that's just crazy that happened about a month ago now. But ultimately, like after everything came together and we learned through the New York Times that Rachel Maddow wasn't down with it, neither were all the hens at MSNBC, which gave opportunity for Nancy Pelosi to send the message to Joe Biden that was like, hey, Joe, it's time to go. And he didn't really want to. And he said he was going to stick it out and nobody was going to tell him what to do, sort of thing. And then, of course, 3 days later, it was announced that Kamala was going to be the guy or woman, and he was going to step down because we learned that there was something in the vicinity of $287 million made available to the Harris campaign. Yeah, it's about the money, people. And they're telling us in this campaign that it's all about the regular folks. Yeah, they need us to basically give them the authority to control us, the authority of power. But to be able to manifest the financial system of which they depend on to continue this insanity. And unless we rectify this and deal with the financial terrorism, we're going to constantly have these ups and downs through insanity, which is based on hyenas of, crack addiction. And the crack is the free money from the Federal Reserve that's being provided illegally, once again, through Federal Reserve Act 13.3, of which I have all of the answers. I have all of the answers. Our emergency lending liquidity of the lender of last resort was not designed, A, to be able to provide liquidity to private interests, one, which was ridiculous because they'd never do that because they'd understand the speculation that it would lead to and the corruption. And who's they? I'm talking about the Federal Reserve, the guys who created the Federal Reserve. And oh yeah, by the way, the name Carter Glass comes out with all of the ways that the statutes were developed, for the Federal Reserve, which was a big deal at the time, but they needed to have a lender of last resort just in case war and other problems, everything else, to keep the country afloat. But at the same time, it makes sense. But what they ended up doing was they provided tens of trillions of dollars illegally to the world's largest racketeering enterprise. And again, it's not rocket science, it's racketeering. It's so easy. It's not even funny. It's just paying the refs. None of us would go to a Super Bowl if we knew the game was fixed. We wouldn't allow it. Same with any sport. So why are we allowing this kind of stuff? And what am I saying? Am I saying that we got to take down Kamala Harris and, prevent her from winning so that Trump can win? No, I'm not saying that. I said it several times at the very beginning. I'm all in on Kamala. But I want millions of us who aren't suckers to come together. And the final piece of this equation is I just happened to see on X before I pressed record on this, that there's a lot of Kennedy supporters, millions of them, they claim, that didn't sign up to vote for Trump. And they're having an emergency meeting to try to figure out what to do. I'm telling you that I represent everything that you guys thought you were buying into with Kennedy. And that's what the Clean New Deal is, because the Clean New Deal has basically four very simple principles. And I'll tie it into what Bobby Kennedy said he was going to do and what he didn't do. But just briefly, Bobby Kennedy said that he wanted to end the, what's it called? The corporate capture, right? He wants to end corporate capture and reconstitute the middle class. No, he doesn't. He wouldn't know how to do it anyway. But he's not ever talking to you about the actuality of Federal Reserve Act 13.3 and how it was used illegally, because he wants everybody to be into crypto. By the way, the crypto that he's involved with, I'm pretty sure that crypto came from the Russians. And I have good reason to believe that because of somebody I was connected to who was his campaign manager, first and foremost. But beyond that, he ends up getting Nicole Kavanaugh, who's what? A billionaireess that basically got her billion because she was married to Sergey Brin, and then she cheated with Elon Musk, and then she gets $1 billion, and then suddenly she shows up as a VP candidate, and all she knows is organic farming. She's not legitimate. Her money is, but she's twerking for Elon. Because Elon, the whole time, I knew that Bobby Kennedy was basically a creation of Tucker and Bannon and all of these guys in this hive network of the shite white supremacist internationalist cabal that Alex Jones pretends like it's the other guys that are the internationalist cabal. When Alex Jones squeals like a pig for Tucker. But, supposedly Bobby was an environmentalist because he cleaned up the Chesapeake Bay or the Hudson Bay. And a good on you for that, right? But he's all in on crypto. Do you not know that contradiction? And then in addition to that, he's like, oh yeah, we're going to be able to be pro-environment and libertarian at the same time. No, you're not. Not remotely. That's just a stupid thing. And then he's like, I'm, anti-CIA because of all of these things and the global hegemony and yada, 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 which justifiably, considering who he is, man, I thought he was the right guy at the right time when he came out. But then he's like, he's not even aware the Federal Reserve 13.3 was ushered in by none other than Sullivan and Cromwell, which was the CIA. They gave birth to the CIA. Yeah, there's more to it than that. And what I'm telling you is that I've got what I've created through everything that I've just told you is the Clean New Deal. It's the answer to Project 2025. One, we got to reconstitute Glass-Steagall so that we create integrity in our financial markets again. B, we got to get rid of Citizens United so that billionaires can't, through dark money, fund all sorts of money to be able to create this lying propaganda matrix that Elon Musk is involved with. That's all X is at the moment. Okay. And then I'm going to demonstrate to you how the $71 trillion was looted over the course of the last 13 years to a very tiny percentage of people that are in the financial sector. That is our shadow sector that Hillary Clinton rightfully pointed out back in 2016. But it's just simply hedge funds and private equity funds and asset management and, of course, high wealth debt management that work in concert with the too big to fail banks, i.e. the systemically important financial institutions. And ultimately, they're the ones in control. Again, the question is, people, to Tim Walz, did the founders envision creating a paradigm where billionaires could loot trillions of dollars illegally to skull fuck the rest of us while they're above the law without any criminal immunity or market immunity, market forces immunity? No, this is a nightmare, guys. The American dream has turned into an American nightmare. And I know that we're all just so desperately wanting hope and change we can believe in, right? But that's just platitudes. Just like back to President Barack Obama, who, when he told us hope and change we can believe in, I was crying tears of joy. But what did he do? He put all of the people that created this madness back in power, and it was a shell game. And he and Michelle sold a lot of books, but they went from about $4.5 million to definitely over $200 million. I think it's closer to $350 million in net worth, but they didn't sell that many books, I can assure you. And Eric Holden went back to Covington and Burling, and I think he got a $30 million bonus, and I'm pretty sure he got paid $12 million a year, which is much, much more than what he was getting paid as the Attorney General of the United States. It's called a revolving door. And so when you see Elizabeth Warren and AOC and all of these other guys and Bernie Sanders, they're all playing ball. They all know this stuff. AOC doesn't. AOC didn't even know that racketeering or RICO was criminal. It's called the racketeering, influence, corrupt organization model statutes to take down organized crime. And she didn't know that was criminal. I'm sorry. This stuff is such a joke. It's unbelievable. I've got the $71 trillion truth that can change the entire paradigm. We've got to invest in our renewable energy infrastructure. We've got to get away from the petrodollar, even though Saudi's already done it, apparently, because they're going to the BRICS. So they may have already sabotaged us, and we're not going to see that, impact for a little while. Although I did read the other day that they stopped buying treasury bonds. And if that's the case, that's the ultimate in terms of the climate of money. It goes from securitization through the network to create derivatives and bonds ultimately, and the bonds are the backstop on the value of the dollar, which enables us to finance all of this stuff. And that's wherein lies the three-dimensional chess and corruption that I'll tell you, both Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and Obama. I'm not going to throw Michelle into the mix because I don't think Michelle actually knows, but Obama certainly does because they're smart and they know how to play this game and they play it better than anyone. What I'm telling you is we got to stop playing this game. Stop buying lies. Stop lying. My name is Patrick Lovell. I've got the $71 trillion truth. I need to penetrate to millions and millions and millions of you who believe in life, liberty, and justice for all, and the integrity of law, who believe in Superman, Batman, Batwoman, Catwoman, Aquaman. I mean, this is ultimately, guys, the League of Justice versus Gotham. And I know that's comparing DC and the TC Comics and why can't I think of the other big one, which is even much bigger, of course. I think I've talked myself out, guys. I hope this can penetrate your brains. It's so important. Everything is on the line. Our democracy is on the line. The future of the world is on the line. Right and wrong is on the line. It's a battle between good and evil. And when you live in light, you live in truth. When you live a lie, you're depraved. When you live in truth, you're bulletproof. And when you live a lie, inside, you die. Stop buying lies. Stop lying. Become a nuclear vector for the Big Bang of truth and spread the word. Truth is marching. Patrick Lovell, The Clean New Deal. Onwards and upwards.